All right, if I could have your attention again, we're going to start the meat of our program. Good afternoon, everybody. Again, my name is Dan Mead-Smith. I'm the president of the Washington Policy Center, and we are thrilled to have this fantastic turnout at our Solution Summit event. This is our third year in Spokane. We've been in Tri-Cities before. We rotate between West and East, so we'll be in Bellevue next year. A lot of people have asked, when's the Bellevue Solution Summit? Western Washington, so 2020 we'll be doing this in Bellevue. It's great to have this great turnout and to have a full-day conference. It's the first year we've done a full-day conference, and people have said, God, we really have enjoyed the concurrent sessions. It's hard to choose which one. So we have a policy tract, and we have kind of a hands-on, dive-in tract. So hopefully you've enjoyed the morning sessions, agriculture, transportation, government reform, and then we've dove in on how to engage millennials, how to work with the media, a legislative session deep dive. So I hope you enjoyed that, and we have a great afternoon plan. So I hope you're planning to stay for the afternoon. And it's not on our agenda in the program, but Governor Walker is so generous with his time. He's done 4 radio interviews with us this morning, including 2 back in Seattle, to get the word out about his great reforms and how we want to bring those to Washington State. But at 5 o'clock for our closing reception, Governor Walker is going to join us. So if you haven't had a chance to interact with him, stay for the end of the day, go to the last session, and at 5 o'clock, again, it was not part of our program, but due to his generosity of his time, he's going to join us for the wine reception. So be sure to be part of that to end a great day of conversation. I want to thank the TVW audience. So we have over 350 people here with us at lunch, and we're going to be broadcasting this on our state's version of C-SPAN TVW over the next few weeks. So if you were not able to attend the whole day, we've been taping all the policy sessions, or if somebody couldn't come to hear Governor Walker, we're going to have this on our website at washingtonpolicy.org so you can watch the entire sessions and, of course, Governor Walker's speech. I want to introduce some people that are with us today at lunch. We have numerous elected officials with us, both at the state, county, and local level. Their names have been up on the screen during lunch, but I want to recognize a few folks. Secretary of State Kim Wyman is with us, if Kim could stand. And also our Washington State Treasurer, Dwayne Davidson, right here. Great to have 2 statewide elected officials with us for our conference, and they've been here for the entire day, which is fantastic. The Republican leader, the House Minority Leader, Representative J.T. Wilcox is with us. And then finally, I apologize I can't introduce everybody, but I want to recognize the Mayor of Spokane, David Condon. David. If all the elected officials at all levels could stand and be recognized, we appreciate you all being here. If you could all stand, even if I called your name earlier. One of the great and fast-growing programs we have at the Policy Center is our Young Professionals Group. I hope all of you are aware that we have a fantastic Young Professionals Advisory Board. We now have 4 college clubs around the state, including 2 here in Eastern Washington, one at Washington State University and one at Gonzaga. We have 3 of our Young Professional Advisory Board members with us, including Carson Bolin, who's our vice chair, Amric Prier and Kate Lamson. If our Young Professionals board members could stand and be recognized, thank you for what you're doing to bring free market policy to our state. And I'm excited to announce today that in addition to our 2 college clubs I mentioned in Eastern Washington, we are starting a Spokane Young Professionals chapter. So Kate Lamson has started a Tri-Cities chapter, and it's been rocking and rolling for 5 or 6 years in Tri-Cities. They had General Mattis as their speaker last summer at her house. And so we are going to start a Spokane Young Professionals chapter, and several of our steering committee is with us. So look for more young professional events taking place right here in Spokane over the next few years. We have a young professionals table out in the lobby, and they're holding their first event in June. So if you're a young professional, or you act like a young professional, and you know a young professional, I encourage you to get engaged with our Young Professionals group and talk to Miranda or Rosemary and check out our Young Professionals table. Everybody knows somebody under 40, so it's a good chance to get them involved with Washington Policy Center. As you know, we put on dozens of events throughout Eastern Washington every year, but our annual Solutions Summit is really unique. More than any other event, it's designed to showcase our 8 research centers and showcase the great knowledge and work of our center directors and the commitment of our center directors to finding solutions to our most pressing policy challenges. A lot of conferences you can go to and talk about problems all day long. There's a reason why we call this the Solutions Summit. We're all about solutions and ways to improve people's lives at Washington Policy Center. If you attended our agricultural session this morning, you saw a great example of that, of how free market principles are being put in practice in ag policy in our state. That's our most recent policy center. You learned how essential ag is to all parts of our state. It employs more people than Microsoft and Amazon combined, our ag sector. And we are thrilled that we are able to engage now on ag policy in Washington state. You heard from transportation, debating the mileage tax, which will be coming our way in the next few months, and we've been ahead of it for the last couple of years. And of course, government reform with Jason Mercier and our work on the income tax and other issues. And Paul Guppy will cover this in a few minutes. We are very pleased to see several victories in this very challenging legislative session, and we want to talk about one right now at lunch, and that's legislative transparency. And a long-standing recommendation of ours at the Policy Center is to allow average citizens from around the state to engage on legislative issues without having to drive all the way to Olympia, especially during the winter when the session takes place, when the pass over the mountains is very challenging to cross, and you might have a minute or 2 minutes to testify. And so we've been champions of remote testimony, letting average citizens go to community college or other community areas in Spokane, Tri-Cities, all over the state, and testify, share their views on what's happening in the legislature live during a committee hearing. We've been championing this for a number of years, and I'm pleased to report that the state Senate, for the first time, made it their common practice for the entire session, and the State House, where it's been very difficult to get traction, is going to study the issue, which we think should be a pretty quick study. All they need to go is across the hall and see what the Senate's doing. But this is the farthest we've gone on this issue. So we saw a pilot project become permanent in the state Senate. Our high-tech state that we pride ourselves on in Washington is finally adopting remote testimony so that people can get to Olympia, at least virtually, and make their points known during the session. So we are going to give, as I mentioned when I started lunch, our first ever Summit Award to the 4 legislative champions of remote testimony. Again, a long-time recommendation of ours. We'll give this award annually at our Solutions Summit. So we look forward to recognizing the great work of our elected officials all across Washington state in ways to improve our state. So those 4 individuals will be receiving this award today. 2 of them are with us. Senate Majority Leader Andy Billig from right here in Spokane is traveling this week and unable to join us, but sends his thanks, and we'll make sure he receives the award afterwards. Democrat Senator Guy Palumbo, who also cannot be with us, but he recorded a short video and is going to be accepting his award via video. So if you turn attention to the screens, for Senator Palumbo's short thank you message.
Honoring me with this award. I apologize that I couldn't make it out to Spokane to accept it in person, but it really does mean a lot to me, and I want to thank you for recognizing my efforts in higher education, as well as our caucus efforts to kind of make the legislature more transparent, to make it more accessible to people from all walks of life that normally can't make it down to Olympia, or maybe can't get over like my good friend Jason Mercier, get over the snow over the passes. So thank you again for recognizing it, and I think we're going to do a lot more next year. We had some hiccups this year with the technology and the acceptance rate among a lot of the colleges, but I think next year you're going to see a more robust platform across other committees, not just mine. So thank you again for the award. I really do appreciate it. Thank you.
And if Senator Mike Padden and Senator Sharon Brown could come up. Senator Padden. Senator Mike Padden was the first to run a remote testimony as a trial run in 2013. In fact, our Jason Mercier was one of the first people to actually testify remotely from Tri-Cities, and he ran it out of Spokane. Senator Brown worked with the Columbia Basin College in the Tri-Cities to set up a dedicated remote testimony room a couple years ago. Senator Palumbo, who you just saw, enthusiastically volunteered the committee he chairs, Senate Higher Ed and Workforce Development, to be the first to offer remote testimony for every hearing during this year's session. And then Senator Billig made it for the entire Senate. And there's about 12 locations all over the state, not just Eastern Washington, where you can testify remotely. So I want to present the award today. And the plaque reads, "For your dedication to increasing access to the Washington State Legislature and strengthening the bond between the public and those who represent them, Washington Policy Center thanks you for ensuring every Washingtonian has an ability to participate in government via remote testimony." Presented today to Senator Mike Padden and Senator Sharon Brown.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you for this award. Thank you to Governor Walker for being here today. And because this is a solutions summit, and because in the Tri-Cities we are solutions oriented, and we are really big into technology and high technology, because we have one of the only national labs across the country right in the Tri-Cities, Pacific Northwest National Lab, we have a great understanding of how to utilize technology. And so, true confessions, I'm going to tell a little story that even Senator Padden doesn't know yet. So when I found out that there was a possibility that we could potentially do remote testimony, I was a brand newly elected legislator. So Jason Mercier, who really deserves a lot of this award, and I were talking along with Dr. Cummins, who was the president of Columbia Basin Community College, and we said, hey, you know what? We can make this happen in the Tri-Cities. I said, all right, let's do it. What do we have to do? We didn't stand around and wait for permission or go get permission or anything. Heck, I didn't even know I needed permission. That's where the funny part of the story comes in. I said, hey, if Senator Padden can do it in Spokane, we can do it in the Tri-Cities. So we did. We got it up and running, and our technology was just rocking fast, and we were doing a great job. And then LegTech comes and knocks on my door and says, Senator Brown, did you get permission to do this? Oh, permission? Did I need permission? So long story short, we have remote testimony in the Tri-Cities, and it's great. So thank you, Senator Padden.
Well, it's great having a partner like Senator Brown and pushing the remote testimony. I was so proud this year. We got a couple new sites this year before the session, Spokane Valley City Hall and out at Eastern. And we had a packed room at the Spokane Valley City Hall when they had a major hearing on the vaccination bill in the Healthcare Committee. So it's been great to see our citizens being able to participate in the legislative process without driving the 6.5 hours over the mountain, sometimes with snow. So it's great. I also want to thank the Policy Center for all that they do in promoting good conservative ideas. And it reminds me a little bit, and I just have to end with a quote from my really political hero, Ronald Reagan, who on October 27th, 1964, giving his speech which kicked off his political career, said, the closest thing to eternal life on earth is a government program. So.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. We believe that the more transparency and light we can shine on government, that's the way we lead to reform. So this is a small step in that, and we're excited to be part of it, and thank you for your leadership in making it happen. I want to turn the program over to Heidi Stanley. Heidi is the vice chair of our Washington Policy Center board, and she's going to take over the program from now. But one thing I did want to make sure everyone knew, because I know there's some new faces from breakfast. If you slept in and you weren't here at breakfast for our opening session, we announced live our annual dinner speakers for Spokane, October 24th at the other Davenport, the Davenport Grand. Secretary of Defense, former Secretary of Defense, James Mattis, will be receiving our highest award, our Columbia Award. We're thrilled to have him back in Spokane and back at our podium, receiving, again, our Columbia Award. And we also announced that former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie will be joining him. So James Mattis, Chris Christie will be a great double bill on October 24th at our annual dinner. Registration is open. We already got tickets from this morning's announcement, and we encourage you to join us and 1,000 other people from all over Eastern Washington on October 24th. So with that, I'll turn over to Heidi.
Well, good afternoon. It's a great day to be in Spokane, Washington. Do you agree? Again, my name is Heidi Stanley, and I am Vice Chair of Washington Policy Center's Board of Directors and proud to be on the Board of Directors. My husband and I own an industrial distribution company headquartered here in Spokane called Empire Bolt, and we're happy to call Spokane our home. Now, like every small business owner, we understand the importance of a strong and predictable business climate in our state. Also, like every citizen in Washington, we want to see our state do better, which is why we are such passionate supporters of the Washington Policy Center. As an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit think tank, Washington Policy Center continues to stand up for free speech, the free exchange of ideas, which is happening today, and the right of people to hear a diversity of viewpoints. This organization continues to grow and continues to move the needle on important public policy issues, such as public charter schools, keeping our state free of any income tax, and influencing the next generation of leaders away from socialism and toward free markets. We can only do this because of the strong base of support we have here in Eastern Washington and, frankly, across the entire state. Now, I'd like to recognize a couple other Eastern Washington folks that are on the board with me. First is Ann Coles. If you just wave your arm. Hi, Ann. Kevin Boucher. Kevin looked right at you. There you are. Kevin is from Yakima. And Bob Tippett. Welcome, Bob, from the Tri-Cities. In addition, there are a few other folks to thank, frankly, and to recognize. Without people like this event and Washington Policy Center's work would not be able to be possible. First, thank you to our generous Pillar Society members. If you're a member of the Pillar Society, please, I was going to say please stand, but you know that's kind of disruptive. So just please wave your arms. Next, I'd like to recognize our conference sponsors. The sponsors of today's Keynote lunch policy session are Bristol Myers Squibb and Schweitzer Engineering Laboratories. Thank you. Our patron sponsors include the Boeing Company, Lilly, Physicians Insurance, a mutual company, and Spokane Gymnastics. Table sponsors include Patrick Cummings, Steadfast Wealth Management, Darigold, Spokane County Farm Bureau, Tri-Cities Home Builders Association, the Washington State Farm Bureau, Washington Trucking Associations, and then the Pillar Society members, if they chose, have tables here also, and their names will be up on the screen. So thank you to our table sponsors. And then a special thanks goes to Sign for Success. That's a company here in Spokane that provided the signage for us today. And also Greater Spokane Incorporated, whom we have had a long time partnership with. And I will just say that GSI is committed to a diversity of thinking and works to promote civic engagement at all levels regarding policy issues that affect our everyday lives. So thank you to those two. Our media partners are News Radio 920, KXLY, News Talk 590, KQNT, and the Spokane Journal of Business. Thank you. So now, please welcome to the stage. We're going to make you wait one more second. Please help me welcome to the stage Washington Policy Center Vice President of Research, Paul Guppy.
So Dan asked me to give a quick overview of our research program, so I've cut my normal 2-hour presentation down to 4 minutes. I'm going to make this real quick. But what I will do is just give a general idea of what our research program does, what our staff does, show a quick video, about 1 minute or so, as an example of how we're communicating ideas out to the world, and then introduce our introducer of our main speaker coming up. So just real quickly, Again, I want to describe kind of how, as a think tank, how our research program works. And the key element or research, and you're meeting them here today, and that is our research team, our center directors that cover our 8 issue areas. And when Dan and I are doing hiring and looking at different talented people, we have people come in with very impressive resumes, former college professors, people from the business world, but there's really only one quality that we're looking for above all, and that is intellectual curiosity. We are really trying to hire people who are fanatically interested in ideas, getting at the facts, and understanding exactly how policy issues work. Then what we do is take that expertise and translate that into various forms that can communicate with the general public. So one good example is I might call Jason and ask him about, what happened with the budget this year? He gives me a long explication about then year dollars and near general fund spending and trust funds, and I say that all sounds great, and I'll just put that into plain English, and then we will send that out to the world. And that's what our staff pretty much does every day. Our feeling is that if you can't explain it to someone else in clear terms, maybe you don't understand the issue yourself. So we are all about communicating ideas to others. We are also very intellectually prepared to, and I'm proud of this with our staff, to debate anyone on the other side on one of our issues anytime, anywhere. It's also very common for Roger or Todd or Maria to say, I've been invited to speak on this forum in Seattle. There are going to be 4 people on the panel. I'm one of them, and then a moderator. And you look at the people that have been set up, and the other 3 members on the panel are on the left, and the moderator's on the left, too. So the Washington Policy Center person is more than happy to go into that forum and in reasonable terms explain our principles and ideas. And they're also pretty much ready anytime. So again, I checked with some of our staff during this event today, and already Todd has done a radio interview this morning, Roger did an interview, Lee did a live radio interview in the car driving over here from Seattle. So even as we're putting on an event like this, our research staff is always ready to communicate our ideas out to the outside world. I've had this happen to myself. A TV producer comes up and says, when would you be prepared to speak on such and such an idea on our TV news program? And my answer is, I'm prepared now. We're ready to start anytime. So, and a good example of that, and you've heard about it, is the work that Jason did on the income tax issue. This was a long-term, foundational, sustained effort to build the framing and the basic information about what an income tax is, and that this labeling cleverly in Olympia, that calling it a capital gains excise tax does not change the nature of what the thing is. And Jason's long-term work in contacting the other treasuries of the other 49 states, contacting the IRS, putting all that information together in order to show that, don't be fooled, a vote for a capital gains excise tax, so-called, is actually a vote on an income tax in Washington state. And that one-sentence description, backed up by all of Jason's intellectual work, we think struck a healthy note of fear in the hearts of most state legislators who said, I don't want to go on record as being in favor of that. And that's why we gained that success. So with that, I mentioned some of the short videos that we've done. David Bowes, our communications director, has really diversified our outreach very skillfully of taking these ideas. And so let's play that video now. It's an example of how we take our research and put it in a form that people can recognize. Go ahead.
In 2018, the U.S. Supreme Court put a stop to forced union membership and affirmed the First Amendment rights of all government employees in a decision commonly referred to as the Janus decision. The First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution protects many of the rights we take for granted: free speech, free press, freedom of religion, the right to petition the government, and the right to a peaceable assembly. Just as it guarantees our ability to freely speak, it also protects us from compelled speech. Despite these protections, in the decades prior to the Supreme Court's 2018 decision in Janus versus American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, people who worked for the state and local governments were often forced to belong to highly political government unions. Workers could jump through hoops to opt out of membership, but were still forced to pay agency fees, which basically amounted to paying 80 to 90% of the full cost of membership. Mark Janus, a child support specialist in Illinois, argued that being forced to pay the union amounted to being forced to pay for political speech he disagreed with. He pointed out that everything the government union advocated for was political, including budget priorities, hiring and firing practices, and taxes. He said he believed the spending priorities lobbied for by his union were detrimental to the state's most vulnerable populations, and he felt it was wrong that he would be compelled to pay an organization to fight for political objectives he disagreed with. Ultimately, the U.S. Supreme Court agreed with Mark Janus and issued a decision that not only guaranteed public employees the ability to opt out of union memberships, but also prohibited the practice of forcing new employees to start as union members. New workers now have the choice of whether or not to become members. Post-Janus, the choice of membership is up to individual teachers, social workers, home care providers, and public employees of all kinds. And anyone who chooses to opt out can't be forced to pay dues or fees of any kind. The Janus decision doesn't bust unions, it simply puts the choice of membership in the hands of individual workers, exactly where it should be. If you or someone you know works for state, county, or local government and would like to know more about your Janus rights, visit washingtonpolicy.org or optouttoday.com.
So with that, and to wrap up this description of our research program, with that you have an example of what I call the iceberg effect. So that is the result of months of research and expertise that was developed by Erin Shannon on our workers' rights projects. And so you only see the top 5 or 10% of what her results are, supported by a lot of knowledge and expertise that she has below that. And again, that helps us when we deal with media, because when hostile media is asking us probing questions or trying to challenge us, our expert's answer is, I'm glad you asked that, let me tell you more. And when the media sees that we could go on indefinitely on a particular topic, the hostility tends to back off. So that video is available on our YouTube channel and available to be shared by social media, and we encourage our members to send that out as much as they can. And with that, now let me shift to the introduction of Dave Whitehead with Schweitzer Engineering Laboratories, one of our main sponsors. They're listed in our program, and he's going to introduce our main speaker. So Schweitzer Laboratories is based in Pullman and is an important employer in the inland Northwest. They have operations in the Spokane Valley, and what they do is design digital protection devices, controls for electricity generation, automation, power transmission. The way I kind of boil this down is that Schweitzer Laboratories literally keeps the lights on. They maintain safe power sources for all of us 24 hours a day. They're so good at this that their founder, Dr. Ed Schweitzer, was recently, earlier this year, inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame. So with that, please welcome Dave Whitehead.
Everybody can hear me? Yes? Good. Good afternoon. My name is Dave Whitehead, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Schweitzer Engineering Laboratories. SEL invents, designs, and builds products and systems that protect and control electric power systems all over the world. Our technology prevents blackouts and enables customers to improve power system reliability and safety. We have 5,300 employees and are a 100% employee-owned company headquartered in Pullman, Washington. SEL manufactures all our electronic devices in the United States since our beginning in 1984. We achieve our mission through a core set of values, one of which is simplicity. Einstein said everything should be as simple as possible, but no simpler. Who would argue with an idea that things shouldn't be as simple as possible? And yet, it seems government is being more complex, just the opposite of where we should be headed as a community, a state, and our country. The Solution Summit is a perfect time to find ways to implement simplicity and innovation in our legislative process, ensuring a level playing field while achieving economic growth. We thank the Washington Policy Center for their help in supporting simplicity, your work in conducting and sharing nonpartisan research on how policy affects our customers, our company, our employees, and our communities is greatly appreciated. Today, it's my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Governor Scott Walker. Governor Walker served as the 45th governor of Wisconsin from 2011 to 2019. One of his first reforms, Act 10, helped eliminate the state's $3.6 billion deficit without raising taxes or cutting health care for those in need. It gave schools and local governments the tools to balance budgets without massive layoffs seen in other states. For all his efforts, he faced a recall election in 2012. But Wisconsin voters sided with Governor Walker and his reforms as he received more votes and a higher percentage of the votes in his recall election than in his 2010 election, proving voters want leaders in office who keep their promises. He then won for a third time when he ran for re-election in 2014. Born in Colorado Springs, Colorado, Governor Walker was raised in Iowa and Wisconsin, attended Marquette University. While in school, he worked for IBM before leaving his senior year to take an appointment to work full-time in finance and development for the American Red Cross. In 1993, he was elected to the Wisconsin State Assembly, and then in 2002, he became the first Republican elected Milwaukee County executive. And I understand Milwaukee County is very similar to our King County, so you can imagine what a triumph that's a badge on. That's probably better than being the governor of Wisconsin, I would guess. Man, congratulations. Voters in the overwhelmingly Democratic county re-elected Governor Walker by increased margins in 2004 and 2008 because he kept his promises to continuously reform county government and put taxpayers first. While politicians and activists spoke out against Governor Walker's reform while he was in office, they now note his successor is using the same techniques to balance Wisconsin's budget. A recent article in the Wall Street Journal noted, Governor Walker's Act 10 is a reminder that good policy transcends partisan politics. Reform-minded governors and Washington politicians should take note. Ladies and gentlemen, our keynote speaker at this year's Solution Summit, Wisconsin's Scott Walker.
Well, thanks, Dave. It is an honor to be back. In fact, I didn't look outside, but I don't think I have as many protesters as I did the last time I was, some of you joined me a few years back when I was a little bit further west and had a few folks out there. In fact, it reminded me, I think it was probably about 6 months before I was here. I was in New York City. It was right after we'd gone through the protests and the recall. Actually, take that back. It was between the protests and the recall. And I was in town trying to get some help together because in the end they spent about $100 million against me, which any of you follow statewide elections here, our demographics are about the same size in Wisconsin as they are in Washington. That's a lot of money. That's actually a lot of money in California, let alone in a state our size. But so I get out of this SUV I'm in, and a guy across the street, about halfway down the block, sees me, and he yells out, "Hey, Governor Walker." And I'm a reasonable guy. I'm from the middle of the country, so I turn and I wave and I say hi. And he says, "You suck." He said, "You are scum of the earth." He said, "I went to Madison and protested you." And the poor guy who was escorting me around that day just turned kind of pale. He was embarrassed. He didn't know what to do. And I just looked over him and I said, "See, they weren't all from Wisconsin." There was actually a lot of truth to that. You know, when we had the protests years ago, they started out legitimately so with people who had a disagreement of opinion with where I wanted to take the state versus where they wanted to take it. But eventually they came from, particularly from Washington, D.C. and New York and New Jersey and elsewhere. And you could see it. This is not in any way exaggerating, because you could see they'd be wearing their jackets. They'd have their signs right on, their hats and their jackets and their banners and the whole bit. And they were from all over the place. I used to remember outside my door, the ones that always amused me. I used to play the drums in high school, were the unions that would come from New Jersey, and they'd have a snare drum about every 20 guys, and they'd play a little rhythm to keep them walking around. And I'm thinking, how much are they getting paid to do all of this? But it was a vivid reminder about what we're at. And I got to tell you, I apologize. A lot of people think that the Occupy movement started in Wall Street. It started on my street. And it eventually went to Wall Street after they found out they had lost the effort that they tried against us. And then, of course, it went elsewhere across the country. Some of you may watch TV, but one of our favorite couples in Wisconsin are Sean Duffy's a congressman from the northern part of our state, and his wife Rachel, you may see occasionally, she's on Fox and Friends in the weekend as a fill-in host. And Sean and Rachel gave me a great bumper sticker, because you remember the height of these protests came not only because they were against what we were doing, they were literally trying to intimidate us. Some of us, before I was signing some books, it's called Unintimidated. They were trying to intimidate us, and not just me, but our legislature. And the reason for that was they had hoped that if enough people came in, it would stop this whole thing from going on. And so to buy themselves some time, the labor lawyers in Washington, D.C., I got to make sure when I say Washington, I clarify, District of Columbia, but the labor lawyers out in Washington, D.C. had found this little-known provision in our Constitution that no one had ever invoked before, that said if you had a piece of legislation that appropriated anything, that you had to have a quorum there. And so even though we had, and I'll touch on this in a moment, even though Republicans had taken over everything, because in 2010 when I ran, Wisconsin was bluer than you are here. You introduced two of your statewide Republicans. We had nothing. We had the treasurer, the secretary of state, the governor, lieutenant governor, both U.S. senators, supermajority of the members of the House of Representatives, both the state assembly and the state senate, all were Democrat. Everything was Democrat. It was just overwhelmingly Democrat. And so we went through all that. They thought, because we'd come in and done this, that they could intimidate us. And so to buy themselves some time to bring more people in, to literally bus and fly and charter people in, they found this provision that in the state senate you have to have this quorum. So even though we had a majority, slight as it was, they sent, you might remember this, 14 Senate Democrats left the state and went to Illinois. In fact, I thought it was a pretty good trade-off as a tourist guy. I liked the idea. 100,000 visitors versus 14 in Illinois. Actually, they didn't stay at our hotels. They camped out in my capital. They really did occupy it. But in the end, after we prevailed, one of my favorite bumper stickers was from Sean and Rachel Duffy, and it said, "One walker beats 14 runners." Yeah. So today I thought I'd talk a little bit about this and how it applies, and it fits in nicely with your Solution Summit. I love the idea, that phrase, Solution Summit. You're not just having a summit on policy ideas, you're talking about real solutions. And I want to give you a glimpse of some of the things we faced and did that might apply, understanding that every state and jurisdiction is a little bit different. So you got to make it apply the way that's right here in Washington State. But how that all works, because as I mentioned, when we came in, it was all Democrat. In fact, part of the reason why they reacted the way they did wasn't just because we had flipped and suddenly here we were proposing these big, bold reforms. Part of it was because Wisconsin not only was Democrat, we were actually the home of a number of pretty crazy things. We were the home of collective bargaining. Ironic that we changed it. Collective bargaining started in the state of Wisconsin. AFSCME, the Public Employee Union, started in Wisconsin. The progressive movement started in Wisconsin. In fact, in Milwaukee, where Tonette and I now live, as do our sons, not with us, but separately, there's nothing better than being an empty nest, except when they're off the payroll. It's really good. Both the kids have jobs as well. But Milwaukee, where we live today, actually had not one but two socialist mayors back in the day. And so this was a state that was primed for reacting to what we were proposing and lashing out. In fact, and your presentation was good about the income tax, because Wisconsin, I'm sad to say, in 1911 was the first state to enact a state income tax. So don't ever follow Wisconsin when it comes to the income tax, because that's a really bad idea, and we've been trying to get rid of it ever since. But when you look at all these things, that's why there were so many people concentrated in our state capital at one time. We had state government there, we had our unions there, we had our university there, we had all these things come together, and so that's why they came out en masse. But we reacted well, and I want to touch on three specific things, three easy things to remember. I want to talk a little bit about relief. I'm going to talk about labor issues, but it really wasn't about labor. It was about relief for our overburdened taxpayers. I want to spend a minute or two talking about reforms above and beyond just what we did with labor reform. And then finally, I want to talk about being ready, because none of this works unless you're ready to do it here and in other places across the country. When I think about relief, oftentimes people will say, well, you're the governor that took on the unions. You're the governor that did all this labor reform. And yeah, we did reform, but it really wasn't about unions. It wasn't about collective bargaining. It was simply this. We took the power out of the hands of the big government special interests, the big government union bosses, and put it firmly in the hands of the hardworking taxpayers. That's what we did. Yeah, sure, we adjusted collective bargaining. We went, when you talked about the Janus decision in that video out there, we were ahead of the curve. We not only given the option to opt out, we actually now in our state, every public employee is by law prohibited from automatically being a part of a union. They don't even even get to voluntarily take their union dues out. If you want to join a union in my state, you got to write a check out just like you would for the Red Cross or your church or synagogue or anywhere else out there, because we wanted no one to be intimidated and forced to be in a union if that's not what they wanted to do. And that's really what it was about. It was about relief for our taxpayers. Certainly relief when it comes to spending. You know, we were able to now at the state and at the local level, because for what we did with our reforms, it wasn't just about state government. I came, as was mentioned in the introduction, from county government. You're right, King and Milwaukee are not that far apart in terms of their politics and their demographics. We came in after a big scandal, but people asked me, where did this come from? You know, was it Alec? I was a proud member in the legislature, but it didn't come from Alec. Was it the Koch brothers? I had never met the Koch brothers before I was elected governor, didn't know anything about them. It really came from 8 years, the mayor probably can attest to this as well, from 8 years of being a local leader. Where I remember once we had a shortfall because the state, controlled by Democrats, cut aid to local government. And so I decided, instead of laying people off, I was going to try something unique. We proposed for 4 months in a row, for 1 week a month, to do one day where we had a 35-hour work week. We thought, okay, we'll put it at the end of the week, put it on Friday afternoons. If they're essential employees, obviously they got to be there, but for everybody else, you're only going to be paid for 35 hours that week, and we'll let you take Friday afternoon off. We'll adjust it so the public would know, and for 4 weeks in 4 different months, we'd spread it out, and that's how we'd balance the budget after the shortfall the state gave us. Unions basically told me, I'm saying it nicer than they did, to take a long walk off a short pier. Why? Because collective bargaining put the power in the hands of the union bosses. And I can still remember, I can vividly remember the young new worker, single mom, who came into my office in tears with some of her coworkers who desperately were pleading for us to do that because she did not want to be laid off. And I said, you got to talk to your union reps, because under the old law, that's the way it was. That was just the way that it was. And so the relief we provided wasn't just in terms of relief for the taxpayers financially, and we did. Over $8 billion have been saved since Act 10. Those were the reforms we passed with our budget repair bill 8 years ago. Since that was put into play, over $8 billion was saved by the taxpayers, the hardworking taxpayers of our state. But it was more than just that. To me, more important than the budgetary savings was the fact that the people the taxpayers elect, the people who run our school boards and our city councils and our county boards, they were the people who were back in charge again. Because I remember that experience where I tried to do something novel to avoid massive layoffs. I couldn't do that before, but now every one of our local officials can choose to do that. And that puts all the taxpayers back in charge, because now the people you elect, not one or two union bosses, but the people we elect in our state and our local governments actually get to make those decisions. And that provided tremendous relief. On top of being pro-taxpayer, oftentimes our opponents would say, oh, you know, you're anti-union. I said, I'm not anti-union. Our trades unions actually do quite well in our state. Why? Because they actually offer something. If you offer training and expertise and the members get some value out of it, they now get the choice and they choose to join. But for the public sector unions that overwhelmingly were just being used as a political force to ram through bigger contracts and stick it to the taxpayers, if they didn't offer something to their members, they were the losers. So I said, this is not only pro-taxpayer, it's pro-worker. It's pro-worker. You know, that teacher in Milwaukee, the city of Milwaukee, where the state and local union dues were $1,400 a year. Now she can use that to save up for her kid's college education or to prepare for a vacation or do what she and her family wants to do along the way. On top of it, it was more than just the union dues, though. I remember back early in 2010, there was a woman by the name of Megan Sampson. Megan was named the outstanding new English teacher for the entire state of Wisconsin. And she was teaching in Milwaukee, which is like Seattle and other urban areas across the country, oftentimes a challenging place to be a teacher. But she worked extra hours, she spent time with her students, she worked with her parents. She was an exceptionally good teacher, and they rewarded her by giving her this distinction. Unfortunately, at that time in 2010, when Democrats controlled everything, with a tough economy and a budget that wasn't meeting its budget revenue projections, the state at the time cut aid, not only to local governments, but to the school districts as well. So what happened to Megan Sampson? This woman who got the Outstanding New Teacher of the Year award for the English teachers in the state, she was laid off. She got a pink slip. Remember, I tell that story, people say, how can that possibly happen? Well, that's the old union contracts. Last hired, first fired. Last in, first out. One of the things I enjoyed the most about our reforms when it comes to Act 10 is that no school district, no city, no county, no other government has to do that again. Instead, because of those reforms, our state and local governments can hire based on merit. They can pay based on performance. That means they can put the best and the brightest in the classroom and other spots and keep them there. And that's what happens all the time in the private sector. People act like this is some monumental experience. We've done it time and time again successfully in the private sector. It was about time that we did it in the public sector as well. And so the interesting thing with that is that was the relief that we got. But we didn't just stop there. And I know you've got a lot of talk about Janus and some of the other, actually you've got some new leeway with the White House with some of the provisions they've made that help ease off. One of the other groups besides AFSCME is SEIU, the big challenge across the country, but particularly here in the state of Washington. We did other things as well. You know, when it comes to collective bargaining, one of the interesting things was people forget it wasn't just about not paying union dues or paying a little bit for pension and health care contributions. In our state, we had this racket under the old system where almost every teacher's union contract in almost every school district in the state required that school district had to buy their health insurance from a place called WA Trust, which just happened to be owned and operated and affiliated with the teachers union. Well, we got rid of that. And so our school districts all across the state, as could our other local governments, were able to bid out their health insurance. But the school districts were the most remarkable. I remember Appleton, Wisconsin, which is just down the way from Green Bay, where the Green Bay Packers play. And we like I was kidding your Representative Rogers, who wasn't able to be here today, but I saw her last week. When she was at a Packers-Seahawks game a year ago, I told her to go in the Packers Pro Shop, get a pink jersey, because it says Rogers on the back. It's got number 12, and nobody will know it's a Packers jersey because it looks like the 12th man of the Seahawks. By the way, we sent you Russell Wilson, so thank you. He went to Wisconsin. But on the collective, or on the change in collective bargaining, that school district in Appleton, Wisconsin, a mid-sized school district just down the way from Green Bay, actually saved over $3 million in 1 year just by bidding out their health insurance. And in that rare case, most of the times it was other private insurers, but in that case, WA Trust won it. So what does that tell me? I hope it tells you the same thing. They were overpaying. If they could bid it down, that's a bit of a racket, right? And that was the kind of reform that changed. And so we did that. We lowered taxes overall by over $8 billion, lowering income taxes, property taxes. We even got rid of entirely the state's property tax. We did all that while still taking a budget where we inherited a $3.6 billion budget structural deficit. Now, I say that because nationally I'm fighting for a balanced budget amendment because I think it's about time if our cities, our schools, our counties, our states, our homes, our businesses have to have a balanced budget. Wouldn't it be nice to have a federal government that actually had a requirement to have a balanced budget? In fact, part of the impetus to get my legislature to act at the time was we did, in our Constitution, have a requirement for a balanced budget. And many in the past would have opted to raise taxes. We said, no way. The economy stunk 8 years ago. When I ran, unemployment was 9.3%. I said, we can't do that. I said, I want a smaller, more effective, more efficient, more accountable state government, but I'm not going to lay off 15,000 public employees at once because random pink slips is not the answer. I'm not going to cut billions of dollars from Medicaid, which potentially could hurt the elderly and truly needy along the way. And so what we did was these reforms we talked about where we targeted it so that state government gave local government less, but in return we gave them all these new tools to be able to get things like contributions for health care and retirement and other things along the way that saved them millions and millions of dollars. We did other things along the way as well, though. In fact, one of the interesting things is I wouldn't necessarily encourage it in every state, but a lot of people don't realize the long list of reforms that we did, because while the protesters were focused on what's now Act 10, all their attention was distracted from all the other things we were doing. So we did lawsuit reform, we did regulatory reform, we passed statewide right to work, not only for our public employees, but for everyone. You go down the litany of things. We did castle doctrine and concealed carry and pro-life legislation, photo ID to vote. All these things were done in a state that hadn't gone Republican for president since I was in high school in the 1980s. We did all that because we didn't take a breath, because we knew Wisconsin was a blue state, and we didn't know how long we'd have an opportunity to make those sorts of lasting reforms stick, and so we did them all over and over and over again. And one of the interesting things that we did, I'm fine, thanks. One of the interesting things we did was we didn't wait. In fact, one of the great lessons I learned that I would pass on here in any other state is something I learned from Mitch Daniels. Some of you might remember Mitch Daniels was the governor of Indiana before Mike Pence. Great guy. I went down almost 10 years ago to the date and met in Indianapolis. Actually, ironically, the staffer who took me around that day was a guy named Eric Holcomb, who now is the governor of Indiana. But Mitch Daniels had done many of the things that we subsequently did, but not at quite the scale. But I wanted to meet with him because I wanted to make sure that we not only could win the election, but more importantly, that we had a game plan to govern. And so all these reforms were things that either through Mitch or through reaching out to our former governor from many years back, Tommy Thompson, or looking at other states and jurisdictions, we tied it all together, and we didn't wait. We started on day one, quite literally. The day we took office, January 3rd, 2011, took the oath of office, walked off the stage, and handed the new Speaker and the new Senate President a call for a special session that started that day. We didn't back down. Because, see, Mitch had told me two important things to remember. One, he said, don't wait to push reforms, because the longer you wait, the more the legislature or legislative body will say it's too close to the next election. You need the time to act. And it really did work, because if I had waited to my reforms until right before the recall, I would not be here as someone who won the recall and then re-election after that. Why? Because the voters needed to see. My ratings early on in 2011 were so low, Time Magazine called me Dead Man Walker. They just didn't think I was going to come back. But because we had time to show that our schools and our local governments not only worked, they were better. And when people saw their property taxes went down for the first time in a decade, after a 27% increase in the decade before, property taxes didn't go down in terms of the amount of the increase. They actually went down. When they saw those things, they said, okay, we're going to give this guy more time to see how this goes. But we had to act right away, which leads to the last thing I want to say. You know, we gave relief for the taxpayers. We put in place a whole series of reforms that were comprehensive. But the last thing is ready. Be ready. And that's why this summit's so incredibly important. Because see, in Wisconsin, for us, it wasn't just going to meet with Mitch Daniels. It wasn't just going to talk to others along the way. We had comparable groups like the Badger Institute and the MacGyver Institute and others that are like the Washington Policy Center. And we had groups who had been for years helping us out. Good example, when I mentioned that bidding out health insurance, one of those think tanks actually did a paper several years before I ran that in detail showed how much savings was there. So not only could I use that to run on, I knew exactly what I was going to do when I got in office. You prepare for that. That's something that you need that help early on. And so what you're doing here isn't just an exercise. It's something that's planning. If you're an optimist like I am, and somebody before mentioned, a senator mentioned Ronald Reagan, I love Ronald Reagan, not just because I'm a Republican or conservative, because he was an optimist. And to me, there's just so much excitement. To live in this country where it doesn't matter what your class or your background, you can do and be anything you want. This is a remarkable place. No matter how down you feel, you should realize that this is America, and we can do anything in this great country, in Washington or Wisconsin or anywhere else out there. And so when I looked at that and saw all these tremendous opportunities, I said, you know, we just got to invest the time, not just to get people to vote for us, but to invest in these ideas, to do a better job of explaining these ideas. So first and foremost, by getting ready, it means having the foundation, which you're doing with this summit today and with follow-up activities. Secondly, along with that, it's not just enough to have policy groups along with it. You've really got to engage, which you have done as well, the grassroots. Reince Priebus used to be the RNC chairman. Reince grew up about 15 miles to the east of me. Paul Ryan, the former speaker, grew up about 15 miles to the west of me. People often ask what was in the water in south central Wisconsin. I said, it's Wisconsin. It was the beer. It wasn't the water. That funny story, Paul and I both worked at McDonald's as kids. The only difference is his manager told him he had to work in the back flipping hamburgers because he didn't have the interpersonal skills to work the front cash register. Honest to God, true. It's true. But when I think about not only having the policy, the firepower that you get through events like this, preparing the ideas, the intellectual ammunition you need to compete, not just in elections, but what comes after that when you govern, but also you got to engage the grassroots, and not just in campaigns, but overall. And so Paul and Reince and I and others, way before the elections in 2010, had gotten involved with Tim Phillips and Americans for Prosperity had come to our state and built a grassroots organization, and we had gotten involved when the Tea Parties were just early out and starting out. We spent a lot of time, instead of being at odds, we went and said, we'll go, we'll talk about our ideas. We'll talk about our principles. We'll talk about our shared interests. And we kind of wove ourselves into that grassroots. And then the final thing, I think as important as anything, is communicating that. I was talking to some folks earlier about this, but I just don't think we can stress this enough. What we did that made us successful when nobody, well, I shouldn't say nobody, when few thought we could be. Nobody thought it when I was the county executive. You were right when you made that reference. There's not a pollster alive that would have told you I could win in Milwaukee County. We won 3 times. But even when it came to a statewide election, as blue as we were at the time, most of the political pundits would have said, there's no way. Some of you might win, but there's no way you're going to flip everything. But we had that intellectual foundation. We had the impact of years spent weaving it into working with the grassroots and building that confidence along the way. And then we found a way to communicate it. And we did it together. It wasn't me. It wasn't a campaign. You had, whether it was me, Paul Ryan, the other members of the House, Ron Johnson, who's now our U.S. Senator, our legislative leaders, we all together said, we're going to focus. And we were so focused because at the time we had both an economic and a fiscal crisis both in our state and in our country. We said everything we talk about is going to relate to those issues. Because everywhere we go, that's what the people are talking about. Their concerns about those issues. Most people aren't policy wonks, but they do get what's in their heart. We speak to the heart. We tell stories about things that really matter to people in ways that connect. And you were so right about that video. Taking these big ideas. I used to call it the ice cream test. If I could stop at the grocery store on the way home when my kids were little and I was at the legislature, and I could tell Dennis Jerkowski, the guy that at the checkout clerk, what was happening before my ice cream melt that I was taking home in the summer to have with my two sons, Matt and Alex, and my wife, Tonette. If I could do that, I passed the ice cream test. But if it took too long, the ice cream would melt and go away. So you got to take these big ideas and simplify them and tell why they matter to people's lives. And then you got to tell it over and over and over again and have the discipline to have everyone say it together. Big mistake we make right of center is we're on to the next idea. The other side tells it over and over again. Well, I'm here to tell you today, my father was a minister for many, many years. He left us and went up to his eternal home last October. But my dad was a preacher, and oftentimes, she didn't create this, somebody else did, but they'd ask, why do you preach to the choir? You've heard that phrase before. And today you might say, well, I'm preaching to the choir. I'm telling all of you are like-minded people to where I'm coming from. You might appreciate what I've done. So why am I talking to you about communicating that? Well, my dad used to say, you preach to the choir because you want the choir to sing. You want the choir to sing. Now, if you sing like me, don't really sing. But sing. Tell that message. Tell that message. And I often say, I was telling some of the folks that gathered earlier, I don't talk like I'm on talk radio. I talk on talk radio a lot. In fact, I sometimes now guest host a little bit. I'm an occasional guest on Fox News, but I don't talk like I'm on Fox News. I talk like I'm having a beer down the block with a family that cares about their kids and their future and wants to know how we're going to help make it better. That to me is ultimately the most important takeaway of all. I told you the what. The why I'll leave with two words. Matt and Alex. That's why I first ran for office. That's why I took a risk in running for county executive in a county that never elected someone like me. That's why I not only ran for governor, but put up with all the crap and put up with the recall and did all that. See, Matt and Alex are my two sons. And whether it's your kids or your grandkids or your neighbor kids or any other kids out there, for me, and I got to imagine for you why you're here today, is that's why you're engaged in this. It's not just to sit around and listen to a nice speaker. Hopefully I'm somewhat as good as you thought I'd be. But more important than that, it's about our kids and our kids' kids and those future generations, and that's why it matters. That's why when people tell you, oh, this is a blue state, no, don't buy into that. Now, you're at a tipping point. You could go down the route and become more and more like Oregon, or even worse, California. Or you could do what we did back in 2010 and say, we're going to take charge here. And you can't just do it 2 or 3 months before an election. This is something where you got to weave it in and make a difference. And the more you talk and the more you can, and speak from your heart. Speak from your heart. Have folks help you digest it down there, but talk about it in ways that matter to you and your life and the things that you do, because that's what matters to people. You see, to me, for my kids, I want to live in a country, and I know that to live in a country means I don't just have to engage in my state, I have to engage in your state and every other one of our 50 states, because that's what the founders intended, that real leadership would happen in the states where the founders intended along the way. And I know that true freedom and prosperity for my kids and your kids and grandkids do not come from the clumsy hand of the government. They come from empowering people to live their own lives and control their own destinies to the dignity that is born of work. So don't forget that. And if you think, is that a little hyped up? No. Every time I go to Philadelphia, I love to stop at Independence Hall. I may have been a geek as a kid, but I loved history so much. I used to think of going to Independence Hall as like going to see the Justice League. It was like superheroes, bigger than life. But I remember the first time I was there, one of the things I've shared many times before is that I looked at the chairs and I looked at the tables, and they weren't much different than the ones you're sitting in right now, a little bit older. But I looked in those chairs and looked in those tables and realized these were ordinary people. Ordinary people who did something extraordinary. They didn't just risk their political careers. They didn't risk their business ventures. They literally risked their lives. Their lives for the freedoms we hold dear today. let us not let a day passes where we ever let them down. Let us prove that it was worth it every single time in Washington and all across these great United States of America. God bless you.
Wow, thank you. That's why when you have a solution summit, you want to have somebody who's all about solutions. So thank you, Governor Walker. That was inspiring. I hope you're inspired. I hope that's why you're involved with the Washington Policy Center and why you're here. We're not just talking about ideas. We want to act on them, and we need all of your help. We need you singing, as Governor Walker said. I hope you'll stay with us this afternoon. We got some great sessions, and it's not just to listen, it's to be active. That's why we have these breakout roundtable sessions. If you're not a member of the Policy Center, I don't need to say anything more inspirational than what Governor Walker just said, but now is the time to get involved. We don't have time to wait. You can fill out the card right in front of you and join. $50 gives you an annual membership to the Washington Policy Center. If you're already a member, it's a great time to invest in one of our key projects. You heard about the Young Professionals Group. That's the future of not just our organization, but our state. We have the tools. We just need to act on them and sing, like Governor Walker said. So encourage you to join. You can join for free if you're new to the organization and test drive it for a while. You can join, like I said, for $50, $100, $500 to invest in the Policy Center. If you're already a member, again, I hope you'll support our income tax project, our charter school project, our worker rights project, our young professionals project. We need you to get involved today. And being here is a great, great start. And share our work, as Paul Guppy said. Share the videos, share the stories. If we want to double the size of this room, we need to have all of you working with us to do that. I encourage you to pick up a copy of Governor Walker's book. As we mentioned, it's for sale right outside. It's a fantastic read. It's kind of the roadmap of how you turn a state around and how you reform a state. It's all right there. I encourage you to pick up a copy. And as I mentioned, we're really happy that he's going to stay with us through the afternoon and join us at our closing reception. So 5 o'clock, Elizabethan room, right where the registration table is. Even if you have to leave for a little bit and go back to work for an hour and miss the session, come back at 5 o'clock and interact with all of our great speakers from throughout the day, including Governor Walker. We're going to head now to the next session. They're going to start right away. There's no break. So environment is starting at 1:40 in the Marie Antoinette room. And ways to reform small businesses is the roundtable discussion down below in Isabella. Thanks for being with us.